What happens when a mayor's daughter thinks her father's title puts her above every law, every badge, and every officer on the road? This arrogant woman walked into my courtroom believing her family name would erase what she did. That money, influence, and a team of expensive lawyers could make a decorated state trooper's broken shoulder simply disappear. But when I forced her father to choose between protecting his daughter and protecting his integrity, what happened next silenced an entire courtroom and an entire city. She stood there looking at me like I was an inconvenience, like this was all beneath her, and she said to that trooper's face, "My father owns this state. You'll be filing unemployment by Monday." The room went cold, but what nobody in that courtroom knew, what even she didn't know, was that Mayor Gerald Holt was sitting in the back row in a plain gray suit, no aides, no press, watching his daughter dismantle everything he'd spent 30 years building. And the decision he was about to make would break hearts, restore faith in justice, and prove that some parents love their principles more than they love protecting their children's worst moments. Before we go any further, less than 5% of you watching are actually subscribed. If you believe that no name, no title, and no family connection should ever put anyone above the law, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is going to spread, and you don't want to miss what comes next. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon, and I was preparing for what looked like a straightforward assault case. At my age, I've presided over thousands of cases, but something about this one felt different the moment the file landed on my desk. The victim was Trooper Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran of the state police, twice decorated for valor. The defendant was 28-year-old Cassandra Holt, daughter of Mayor Gerald Holt, the most powerful elected official in this city. The case file told a story that made my stomach turn before I'd even finished the first page. 3 days before she walked into my courtroom, Cassandra Holt had been clocked doing 97 miles per hour in a 55 zone on State Route 9. Trooper Webb activated his lights and expected what any officer expects: a nervous driver, a reasonable exchange, a citation. What he got was something entirely different. The white Porsche pulled over slowly, too slowly. Webb stepped out and approached with the calm professionalism that had defined his entire career, measured, courteous, exactly by the book. But before he could reach the driver's window, the door swung open. Cassandra Holt didn't wait to be addressed. She stepped out of that car with the energy of someone who had never once been held accountable for anything in her life and had decided today would be no different. She pointed her finger in his face. She told him he had no idea who he was dealing with, that her father ran this city, that this stop was a mistake Trooper Webb was going to spend a long time regretting. Webb remained calm. He asked her to return to her vehicle. That's when she shoved him, both hands, full force, driving him hard into the side of his patrol car. Webb's shoulder took the full impact. He heard it tear before he felt it. He went down. Cassandra looked at him on the ground, got back into her Porsche, and drove away without a word. She left a twice-decorated 20-year veteran collapsed against his own vehicle on a public highway. His shoulder required surgery. He spent 3 days in the hospital. What Cassandra Holt did not know as she drove away that afternoon was that a motorist on the overpass above had filmed every second on a phone camera, and that Webb's own dashboard had captured every word she said before she put her hands on him, every single word, including the ones that would define this entire case before it ever reached my courtroom. The motorist's video hit social media at 11:47 that night. By midnight, it had 50,000 views. By morning, it had 10 times that. And by the time the local news stations led with it at 6 a.m., the city had already made up its mind. The clip was only 43 seconds long, but it didn't need to be longer. You could see everything. You could see Webb's professional composure. You could see Cassandra's finger in his face. You could see the shove, clear, deliberate, unambiguous, and you could hear, captured perfectly on the dashboard audio that law enforcement unions would later call the most damning 40 seconds of footage this city has ever produced. Exactly what she said before she did it. "My father owns this state. You'll be filing unemployment by Monday." Law enforcement unions released a statement before breakfast. Veterans organizations followed by noon. By mid-afternoon, 3 city council members had gone on record demanding charges. The mayor's office issued a careful 2-sentence response that satisfied absolutely no one and seemed to confirm every suspicion people already had about how this would be handled. The comments under that statement were not kind. The hashtag ran for 4 straight days. Reporters camped outside the precinct, outside the courthouse, Outside the mayor's office, someone left a thin blue line flag and a get well card at the entrance to Trooper Webb's hospital floor, and by the next morning there were 200 more. People who had never met Marcus Webb in their lives drove across the city to leave them. The district attorney announced charges within 72 hours. The speed at which that announcement came told you everything about the pressure the office was under. This was not a case anyone could quietly make disappear. Not with that footage living rent-free on every phone in the state. By the morning of trial, my courtroom was packed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Reporters filled the press gallery shoulder to shoulder. Trooper Webb's fellow officers sat in uniform, still and silent, in the rows behind the victim's bench. Court watchers who follow my cases had lined up before dawn. And there was an energy in that room, a current running just beneath the surface, and that told me before a single word was spoken that this day was going to matter. I've been doing this long enough to read a person completely in the time it takes them to walk from the door to the defense table. Posture, pace, eyes, everything tells you something before a single word is exchanged. And the moment Cassandra Holt walked through those courtroom doors, she told me everything I needed to know. She was dressed like she was attending a charity luncheon. Cream blazer, silk blouse, heels that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Her hair was perfect. Her composure was theatrical, the practiced calm of someone who had been coached extensively and had decided, somewhere between the coaching and this moment, that she simply wasn't going to take any of it seriously. She moved through that packed courtroom the way people move through spaces they believe were built for them. She passed Trooper Webb without a glance. He was sitting in the gallery in full uniform, his right arm still supported in a sling, his posture straight and dignified despite everything. She didn't slow down. She didn't look. Not a flicker of acknowledgement, not a trace of discomfort. Nothing. And in that single moment of deliberate blindness, she told me more about her character than any testimony ever could. Behind her came 3 attorneys. Her lead counsel, Richard Payne, one of the most expensive defense lawyers in the state, flanked by 2 junior associates carrying matching leather portfolios like props in a performance. Payne moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to making problems evaporate, already scanning the room, already calculating. I watched all of it from the bench. I let them settle. I let the room breathe. I have a reputation for impartiality, and I guard it carefully. But I will tell you plainly that by the time Cassandra Holt pulled out her chair, adjusted her blazer, and surveyed my courtroom with an expression that could only be described as mild inconvenience, my patience was already running thin. I had read the case file, I had watched the footage, I had seen the hospital report and the surgical notes and the 3 witness statements, and I had watched that woman walk past a decorated officer she put in a hospital without a single moment of hesitation. My glasses came off before she even sat down. I called the case. The bailiff read the charge, assault on a law enforcement officer, and I asked Cassandra Holt how she wished to plead. Payne was on his feet before the question finished leaving my mouth, launching into a prepared statement about context and provocation and his client's otherwise spotless record. I stopped him with one hand. "Counselor, I asked your client, not you, not your briefcase, not the associates you brought for decoration. Ms. Holt, how do you plead?" She looked at me with those carefully composed eyes and said without a trace of hesitation, "Not guilty. This whole situation has been completely blown out of proportion." Blown out of proportion. I set my pen down very slowly. The courtroom went still in the way it does when people sense that something is about to shift. "Ms. Holt," I said, "a 20-year state police veteran required shoulder surgery. He spent 3 days in a hospital. Would you like to reconsider that characterization, or shall we continue?" She didn't reconsider. That was the moment I understood exactly who I was dealing with. Payne tried to redirect, tried to insert himself between his client and the direction this was heading, but Cassandra had already decided she was going to handle this herself. In my experience, that decision never ends well. "He came at me aggressively," she said. I reacted. Anyone would have, and frankly, the way this has been covered in the media, you'd think I'd attacked someone defenseless. He's a trained law enforcement officer. I barely touched him. The gallery didn't gasp so much as exhale, a collective release of disbelief that filled the room like pressure. I came down from the bench. I don't do that often, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. I walked to the monitor, pulled up the dashboard footage myself, and played it without a word. 43 seconds. Webb's calm professionalism, her escalation, the shove, the sound of impact, him going down. I turned to face her. That man has protected this state for 2 decades. He approached your vehicle with courtesy and was assaulted for it. I let the silence hold. Barely touched him. That's what you want this courtroom to believe? Cassandra Holt looked back at me and said nothing, but she didn't look away either. That told me everything. Payne stepped in then, smooth and practiced, the way expensive lawyers do when they sense their client has said too much. He began reframing the narrative with the quiet confidence of a man who had made calls before this trial that he believed had already shaped its outcome. The stop itself was irregular, he suggested. The footage lacked full context. Trooper Webb's account carried the natural bias of an officer whose ego had been wounded. And then, carefully, almost delicately, he mentioned the mayor. Not as a threat, not explicitly, just a reminder woven into a sentence about community standing and his client's family background and the nature of public service in this city. A reminder that Gerald Holt had spent 3 decades building this community, that perhaps the charges, as filed, reflected the media pressure of the moment more than the measured judgment the situation actually warranted. The room heard it. Everyone heard it. You could feel the weight of it settle over the gallery like a change in weather, that familiar, dispiriting recognition that this is how it works, that names like Holt don't get treated like everyone else, that the footage and the surgery and the 43 seconds of undeniable evidence might not actually be enough. Cassandra sat straighter. The faintest trace of a smile returned to the corner of her mouth. I let Payne finish. I gave him every word of it, and then I folded my hands on the bench and looked past him, directly at Cassandra Holt, and asked a question I already knew the answer to. Ms. Holt, is your father in this courtroom today? The smile stopped. Payne turned slightly, caught himself, turned back. One of the junior associates looked toward the rear of the room before he could stop himself, a small involuntary movement that confirmed what I had already suspected from the moment court was called to order. Cassandra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't know, she said carefully. He may have come to support me. I nodded slowly. Let's find out. I looked toward the back of the courtroom and said calmly and clearly, Mayor Holt, if you're present, I'd ask you to identify yourself. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure in the third to last row stood up. No entourage, no aide at his elbow, no press badge or city seal or any of the apparatus that usually surrounds Gerald Holt when he moves through public spaces. Just a man in a plain gray suit, a little thinner than his official photograph suggested, with the face of someone who had not slept well in several days. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked not at me, not at the cameras, but at his daughter. Cassandra turned in her chair and saw her father, and for the first time since she had walked through those doors, the composure failed her completely, not dramatically. Just a sudden visible fragility, like something structural, had given way behind her eyes. Mayor Holt walked to the front of the courtroom without being asked. He stood before the bench and spoke without notes, without preparation, without any of the careful political language that had defined his public career for 30 years. He said that what his daughter did to Trooper Webb was wrong. Unambiguously, inexcusably wrong. He said he had watched the footage and had no interest in disputing it or contextualizing it or asking anyone in that room to see it differently than it appeared because it appeared exactly as it was. He turned to where Trooper Webb sat in the gallery, arm in its sling, expression unreadable, and apologized to him directly. Not as a mayor, he said, but as a man who understood the weight of a badge and was ashamed that his family name had been used to threaten someone who wore one. Then he looked at me. Your Honor, I am not here to intervene. I am here to make clear that my office will not be used to protect my daughter from the consequences of her actions. Whatever this court decides, she will face it. I give you my word. The courtroom erupted. Cassandra sat perfectly still, staring at her father, the legal team around her suddenly irrelevant, the smile gone as if it had never existed at all. I gave the courtroom a moment to settle. Then I put my glasses back on, straightened the file in front of me, and looked at Cassandra Holt with the full, undivided attention this case had earned. Ms. Holt, I began, my voice measured and deliberate, I have presided over this courtroom for a very long time. I have seen privilege walk through those doors in every form it takes: old money, political connection, inherited title, purchased legal talent, and in every case, without exception, the facts have been the facts. Your facts are not complicated. You assaulted a law enforcement officer on a public highway. You invoked your father's name as a weapon. You left a decorated 20-year veteran on the ground and drove away. I find you guilty of assault on a law enforcement officer. Payne didn't move. There was nothing left to object to. Here is your sentence, I continued. You will serve 60 days in the county correctional facility. You will complete 300 hours of community service, specifically working with law enforcement family support organizations, people who understand the cost of this profession in ways you clearly do not. You will attend psychological counseling for 1 year because consequences without understanding produce nothing. You will write a formal letter of apology to Trooper Marcus Webb, and you will read it aloud in this courtroom before you are remanded. You will record a public video statement taking full personal responsibility for your actions to be posted across your family's official platforms and your own. I paused and let each element land. Furthermore, that video will be shared with every law enforcement training academy in this state, not to humiliate you, to educate the next generation about what unchecked privilege looks like when it meets a badge and decides the badge doesn't matter. From the back of the room, Mayor Holt spoke quietly but clearly. Your Honor, I want to add one condition of my own. I nodded. Cassandra's access to her trust fund is suspended until every hour of service is completed and verified. She will find her own housing. She will support herself. He paused. Privilege, as I should have taught her long before today, is something you earn, not something you inherit. Cassandra closed her eyes. For the first time since that morning, she looked exactly her age. The gavel came down and the room exhaled, not in celebration, not in relief, but in the particular quiet that follows something that has genuinely mattered. Officers moved toward the defense table to remand Cassandra into custody. Payne said something to her in a low voice, something procedural, something about next steps, but she wasn't listening to him anymore. She was looking at her father, who had already risen from his seat and was walking slowly toward her through the silent courtroom. They met in the open space between the gallery and the defense table. No attorneys, no aides, no cameras close enough to intrude on what this was. Mayor Gerald Holt stood before his daughter, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. He looked at her the way parents look at their children when they are simultaneously heartbroken and completely certain they are doing the right thing. A look that contains love and grief and resolve all at once, inseparable from each other. He put both hands on her shoulders. I love you, he said quietly. I have loved you every day of your life, and I will love you every day of this. But I love you too much to stand between you and what you need to face. His voice held, but only just. This is going to be hard, and you are going to get through it. And when you do, you will be someone I am proud of again. You've always had that in you. I need you to find it. Cassandra broke, not the composed, managed emotion of someone performing remorse, but genuinely broke, the way people do when they finally stop holding something. I'm sorry, Dad, she said, her voice stripped of everything that had been in it all morning. I'm so sorry. I know, he said, pulling her close. Now prove it. The officers waited with quiet dignity while the mayor held his daughter. When they finally stepped apart, Cassandra straightened, nodded once, and walked with them without being asked twice. Gerald Holt stood and watched her go. Then Trooper Webb, arm in his sling, 20 years of service in his posture, crossed the room and extended his good hand. The mayor took it. Around them, Webb's fellow officers rose to their feet. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. I watched from the bench and thought that in all my years, I had never seen a room full of people so completely silenced by the weight of someone doing the right thing. 6 months later, Cassandra Holt walked out of the county correctional facility carrying a single duffel bag and wearing clothes that had no designer label worth mentioning. The photographers who had camped outside on the first day had mostly moved on to other stories. There was no town car waiting, no assistant with a schedule, just a woman who looked for the first time in her public life like someone who had been genuinely changed by something. The 300 hours with law enforcement family support organizations had not been easy, and she had not pretended they were. She had sat with spouses who waited through night shifts and didn't sleep until they heard the door. She had listened to children describe what it felt like when a parent left for work and the family didn't know if they were coming home. She had folded fundraiser envelopes and answered phones and made coffee and done every small, invisible task that keeps those organizations running. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, something in her had quietly, irreversibly shifted. She and Trooper Marcus Webb met 6 weeks after her release at a community event organized by one of the support groups she had continued volunteering with, continued without being required to, without a camera present, without anyone keeping count. The conversation between them was long and private, and both of them would later describe it the same way: necessary. Webb returned to full duty the following month. He said, in an interview he gave reluctantly and kept brief, that he held no bitterness, that the job required him to believe in people's capacity to change, that he intended to keep believing it. Cassandra's video apology, recorded plainly, no styling, no script, was viewed over 3 million times. She spoke at 2 police academies before the year was out, standing in front of rooms full of recruits and telling them exactly what she had done, exactly what it had cost, and exactly what it had taken to begin becoming someone worth respecting. She did not make it comfortable. She wasn't supposed to. The woman who once told a decorated state trooper that her father owned this state now advocates full-time for law enforcement family welfare and speaks publicly about the quiet violence of inherited power. Mayor Holt attended every one of her speaking engagements. He sat in the back row each time, just a man in a plain gray suit watching his daughter become someone neither of them had known she could be. I've thought about this case many times since that day. I think about Gerald Holt standing up from that back row in his plain gray suit, no armor, no apparatus, just a father who had decided that loving his daughter meant refusing to save her. I think about Marcus Webb extending his good hand across that courtroom floor, a gesture of grace that nobody in that room had earned less and deserved more. And I think about a young woman who walked into my courtroom believing her last name was a get-out-of-jail-free card, and walked out of a correctional facility 6 months later carrying nothing but the person she was finally becoming. People ask me sometimes what keeps me doing this after all these years, and the answer on the best days is cases like this one. Not because justice was easy, it wasn't. Not because everyone behaved well, they didn't, not at first. But because when the moment came, one man chose his principles over his instincts, and that choice changed everything downstream. It changed the courtroom. It changed the sentence. It changed his daughter. It changed, I suspect, the way every person who watched that day thinks about what real accountability looks like. I want to say something directly to everyone watching this. Real love is not protection from consequences. Real love is standing in that back row in a plain suit with no entourage and letting the person you love face exactly what they need to face. It is the hardest thing a parent can do. Gerald Holt did it anyway, and because he did, his daughter is someone worth knowing today. If this story moved you, if you believe that no name and no title should place anyone above the law, and that real transformation is possible when justice is delivered with both firmness and purpose, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Like it if you believe the men and women who put on a uniform every day deserve the full protection of the law they serve. And subscribe, because stories like this one, stories where accountability wins, where grace shows up unexpected, where people become better than they were, these are the stories worth telling. Justice served, silence broken, lessons learned,